the stalker who sent her future obituary before she even knew. She was in danger. The email that shouldn't exist. The message was plain text, no sender name, no signature. Claire Turner, born the 14th of March, 1994, died the 18th of August, 2021. Age, 27, cause of death, homicide. Survived by no immediate family. Claire stared at the screen, a chill creeping down her spine. This was some kind of joke. She clicked on the sender's email address. No name, no profile, just a string of random letters and numbers. She clicked reply. But before she could type anything, her phone buzzed. A new text message. Unknown number. You have 15 days left. Her stomach dropped. Whoever had sent this, they were watching her. The slow descent into fear. At first, Claire tried to convince herself it was a prank. Maybe someone hacked her email. Maybe it was a sick joke from an ex. But as the days passed, things started happening. Things she couldn't ignore. The sound outside her window. 2 days after receiving the email, Claire woke up at 2:32 a.m. She didn't know why at first, just an uneasy feeling that something wasn't right. Then she heard it, the faint crunch of gravel outside her window. She lived on the ground floor, and her bedroom faced the narrow alley behind the building. It could have been a stray cat or the wind, but when she peered through the blinds, nothing. No one was there. She lay awake the rest of the night, her mind racing. The van that wasn't there before. On the 6th day, Claire noticed a white van parked across the street. It wasn't unusual for delivery vans to come and go, but this one didn't leave. It sat there for hours. When she left to walk to the grocery store, the van was still there. When she returned, it was parked one space closer to her building. She could feel someone watching her, but every time she looked up, the windows were dark. No movement inside. The strange voicemail. 10 days after the email, Claire's phone buzzed again. A voicemail from an unknown number. She hesitated before pressing play. Static at first, then a low, distorted voice. It's almost time. No explanation. No hint of who it might be. Her hands trembled as she deleted it. The notes that started appearing. The following morning, she found a slip of paper tucked under her windshield wiper. It read, 12 days. It wasn't even signed. When she looked around, no one was in sight. That evening, another note appeared on her front door, 11 days. The handwriting was identical. And then, someone knocked. The shadow at her door. Claire's heart pounded as she stared at the door. No people. Just the solid wooden door separating her from whoever was on the other side. "Who is it?" she called out, her voice unsteady. Silence. She backed away, grabbing her phone. But when she glanced down at the screen, a new text. "You're wasting time." She looked up again, and the knock came once more. Harder this time. She pressed 9 to 1, -1, but didn't hit dial. Her breath caught in her throat. And then, nothing. The knocking stopped. When she finally opened the door, nobody was there. But another note was pinned to the frame. 10 days. The mark on her door. Claire tried to keep her routine as normal as possible. She met her freelance deadlines. She went to the coffee shop down the block. She kept telling herself that if she just ignored it, it would stop. But then she saw the mark. Scratched into her apartment door was a crude symbolist circle with an X through it. It hadn't been there before, and it wasn't random. The day everything changed. On the morning of the 15th of August, 3 days before the date in the email, Claire received one final message. It was just a single word. Ready. Her blood ran cold. She knew then that whoever was behind this wasn't playing a sick prank. They weren't trying to scare her. They were warning her. Something was going to happen, and she only had 3 days to figure out what. The 4th of August, the unseen watcher. Claire worked from home, her desk positioned by her second floor window overlooking the street. She was halfway through a Zoom call with a potential client, trying to stay focused despite the growing tension in her chest. The client was going over design preferences, the sound of their voice crackling slightly through her earbuds. But something drew Claire's eyes away from the screen. A movement outside. She shifted her gaze to the window, and that's when she noticed him. A man standing across the street. He was tall, dressed in a dark jacket despite the warm weather. His face was obscured by shadows, but Claire could feel his eyes on her. He wasn't doing anything. Not walking, not looking at his phone, just standing there, staring up at her apartment. At first, she tried to brush it off. There were often people on that corner, delivery drivers, neighbors, kids riding bikes, but this was different. The man was completely still. Too still. He didn't even seem to shift his weight. And when Claire glanced back at her computer screen, pretending to focus on her call, she felt the weight of his gaze pressing on her like a physical force. Her client's voice faded into the background as Claire's unease grew. She looked directly at the man again. He didn't move, didn't look away, just stood there. Her hand hovered over her phone on the desk. Should she call someone? But who? What would she even say? Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. She decided to snap a photo first, just to prove to herself that he was really there. Careful not to be obvious, she raised her phone to the blinds and snapped a quick picture. The click of the camera felt louder than it should have. When she lowered her phone and looked back out, he was gone. The street was empty. No sign of the man. No sign that anyone had been there at all. Claire's heart raced as she swiped to her photos. The image showed the corner, the sidewalk, the bushes near the curb. But no man. It was as if he had vanished the second she took the picture. Her hands trembled as she set the phone down. She tried to focus back on her call, her client still talking about color palettes and logo designs, but her mind was elsewhere, her thoughts racing. This wasn't her imagination. She knew someone had been there. She knew he had been watching, and she knew he would be back. The 6th of August, the lock that wasn't locked. That night, Claire came home from a late grocery run and reached for her keys. The air outside was cool, the streets unusually quiet. She parked her car in her usual spot and walked the short path to her door, her bag of groceries rustling in her hand. The neighborhood always felt safe, familiar, but as she approached the door, a strange heaviness crept over her. She gripped her keys tightly, the metal cold against her palm. Her footsteps slowed as she reached her front step. Something felt off. She couldn't explain it, but the air seemed heavier, the shadows stretching just a bit too far. She slid the key into the lock, the movement automatic after years of habit. But before she could turn it, the door pushed open. Her heart skipped a beat, then pounded in her chest. She froze, staring at the door, her hand still holding the key. The thought that she might have forgotten to lock it earlier crossed her mind, but she dismissed it. She always locked the door. Always. She took a step back, looking around. The street was empty, the faint glow of a street lamp, the only light nearby. She glanced at the door again. It was open just a crack, as if someone had pushed it from the inside. Claire swallowed hard and stepped forward. Her free hand touched the edge of the door. She nudged it open further, peering inside. The apartment was dark, silent. Only the faint hum of the refrigerator broke the stillness. She stepped inside slowly, her breath catching in her throat. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for anything out of place. But everything seemed untouched. The couch, the coffee table, the pile of unopened mail exactly where she'd left them. Her bag of groceries weighed heavy in her hand. Nothing was missing. Nothing was out of place. Except for one thing. On the kitchen counter where she had left her grocery list that morning, there was a single piece of paper, typed, one sentence, "I'm already inside." Claire's blood ran cold. She froze, the grocery bag slipping from her fingers. A can of soup rolled out, thudding softly on the floor. Her eyes locked on the note, her mind racing. Her breathing quickened, and she took a step back toward the door. She glanced at the windows, still closed. Her apartment felt colder than it had ever felt before. Suddenly, every shadow in the room seemed deeper. Every piece of furniture, every corner, felt like it was hiding someone. She strained her ears, listening for the faintest sound of movement. Nothing. Only her own ragged breathing. Claire backed out of the apartment, her heart hammering. Her legs felt unsteady as she turned and bolted. She didn't bother locking the door behind her. She didn't look back. That night, she stayed at her friend Jenna's house. She told her what happened, voice shaking, barely able to get the words out. Jenna sat beside her, trying to comfort her, but Claire couldn't stop trembling. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. "I think someone's in my apartment," Claire finally whispered. Jenna reached for her phone. "Should I call the police?" she asked, her voice calm but insistent. Claire hesitated. What would she even tell them? There was no proof, no sign of a break-in. Just a note, just a feeling. "No," Claire finally said. "No, they won't believe me." The hours dragged on. Claire lay awake on the couch, jumping at every creak in Jenna's house. Every faint rustle of the wind outside sent her pulse racing. When she finally dozed off, it was almost morning. And in her brief, fitful dreams, she kept hearing the same words over and over. "I'm already inside. The 10th of August, the future funeral." The package arrived in the early afternoon. It was left on her doorstep, a plain manila envelope with no return address. Claire brought it inside cautiously, half expecting it to contain nothing but junk mail or an advertisement. When she opened it, her stomach turned. Inside was a single piece of thick cardstock, a funeral invitation, printed on expensive paper, the kind used for formal occasions. Memorial service for Claire Turner. Date, the 20th of August, 2021. Location, Greenfield Cemetery. Plot 17B. Time, 3 p.m. At the bottom, "You should dress accordingly." Claire's hands trembled as she read it. She flipped the card over, hoping to find something to explain why she'd received it. But the back was blank. She held it up to the light, looking for hidden watermarks or clues. Nothing. She dropped the invitation on the counter, feeling her knees grow weak. She called her friend, her voice shaking. "I got a funeral invite for me. It's in 3 days." Her friend came over within minutes, and they both stared at the card in disbelief. "Did you tell the police yet?" her friend asked, her voice urgent. "No, not yet." But she knew she had to. The police investigation that led nowhere. By now, Claire was terrified. She went straight to the Greenfield Police Department, clutching the card in one hand and a folder of printouts in the other. The folder contained the emails, the texts, the typed note from her counter. She explained everything. The door being unlocked, the strange man outside her apartment, the invitation, everything. The officer behind the desk nodded sympathetically. They took her statement, filed a report. But there wasn't much else they could do. The emails had been sent from an encrypted server. The text came from untraceable burner numbers. The man she had seen in the street, the only physical lead, didn't appear on any nearby security footage. It was as if he had never been there. "There's no direct threat here," the officer said. "No crime has technically been committed. We can't act unless there's more concrete evidence." Their advice was well-meaning but hardly comforting. "Be vigilant, change your locks, stay in touch if you notice anything else." Claire left the station feeling more alone than ever. She'd been hoping for some reassurance, some sense that someone had her back, but the police couldn't see what she saw. They couldn't feel the weight of the unseen presence that was closing in on her. And they couldn't explain why the date of her own funeral was only days away. The 15th of August, the closet door. Claire barely slept anymore. Every night, the air in her apartment seemed heavier. Every corner, every shadow, felt like it held something she couldn't see. She tried keeping all the lights on, sleeping with her phone in hand, and leaving the television running just for background noise. But it didn't help. Nothing helped. That night, at 2:42 a.m., she heard it. A creak. Soft, slow, deliberate. At first, she thought it might be the building settling. Old wood, loose floorboards. But then she heard it again. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding in her chest. Her phone screen glowed faintly on the nightstand, the time glaring back at her. Her room was dimly lit by the street lamp outside, the light filtering through her blinds. The sound came again. From her bedroom closet, Claire swallowed hard and reached for her phone. She unlocked it with trembling hands, her thumb hovering over the emergency dialer. No signal, not even one bar. Her breathing quickened. She glanced at the closet door. It was open just a crack. A thin slice of darkness cutting into her room, but she had closed it before bed. She was absolutely sure she had closed it before bed. Her fingers hovered over the screen, unsure of what to do. Her eyes darted back to the closet. Her imagination ran wild. Was someone in there? How long had they been waiting? How did they get inside? Then, the silence broke. A whisper. 4 days left. The voice was low, soft, and chillingly clear. Claire screamed. Her voice echoed through the empty apartment. She didn't wait to find out who or what was in that closet. She grabbed her keys, bolted for the door, and ran. She didn't stop running until she reached the nearest police station. Her heart was still racing as she burst through the doors, tears streaming down her face. This time, the officers didn't tell her to calm down. This time, they saw the genuine fear in her eyes. A pair of officers accompanied her back to her apartment. They carried flashlights and walked her through the door, scanning the room carefully. Claire stood frozen by the door as they searched every inch. The closet was last. One officer opened it slowly, his flashlight beam cutting through the dark space. Nothing. No one was inside. Just her clothes hanging neatly, the faint smell of old fabric softener. But then, one of the officers noticed something. Tucked between the hangers, a black and white photo. Grainy, low quality. A shot of Claire sitting at her desk. Her back was turned in the picture, but the details were unmistakable. It had been taken from inside the apartment. The officer held it up, frowning deeply. "Do you recognize this?" Claire's stomach churned. She shook her head. "Two don't even have a camera. I've never seen that before." They searched again, checking every vent, every drawer, every possible hiding spot. But there was no camera. No explanation. No sign of an intruder. The officers left after ensuring the apartment was secure. But Claire couldn't stay. The thought of stepping back into that bedroom made her skin crawl. She packed a bag and went straight to her friend's place. She stayed up all night, staring at the grainy photo, trying to make sense of what was happening. All she could think about was the whisper. 4 days left. What would happen in 4 days? Who was doing this? And why couldn't she stop it? The 18th of August. The deadline arrives. The day Claire had been dreading. She had counted the hours, watched the minutes tick by, unable to think about anything else. Every email, every note, every whisper from the closet had led her to this moment. She didn't know what would happen, but she knew something would. She barricaded herself inside the apartment, her windows locked, curtains drawn. The police had been called again that morning, but they offered nothing more than a drive-by patrol. No threats, no crimes, no leads. She was alone. She didn't leave the house, didn't answer the phone, didn't eat, didn't sleep. She sat on the couch, clutching the handle of a kitchen knife so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her phone sat in her lap, the screen lighting up every few minutes as she checked the time. Every creak in the apartment made her flinch. The clock on the wall felt louder than it ever had before, the ticking like a countdown. 11:58 p.m. Her phone buzzed. She stared at the screen. A message from an unknown number. Time's up. Before she could even process it, the apartment plunged into darkness. The lights, the faint glow of her phone charger, the hum of the refrigerator, everything gone. She froze, her heart hammering. She held her phone up, but the screen wouldn't turn on. The knife felt cold in her hand. The room was silent. Claire didn't hear him enter, but she felt him, a shift in the air. The faintest creak of a floorboard, a shadow brushing past her in the dark. She jumped to her feet, knife raised. Her voice trembled as she yelled into the void, "Who's there?" No response, only the sound of her own breathing, her own heartbeat, loud and frantic. She stumbled backward, the edge of the couch catching her leg. Her phone slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. In the darkness, she could see nothing, but she could sense it. Something was there. A whisper, close, too close. "I told you, Claire." She swung the knife wildly, the blade slicing through empty air. She could hear movement now, footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling her. "Show yourself," she screamed, her voice breaking. Her hand trembled, the knife heavy in her grip. She backed toward the kitchen, her other hand groping for the counter. If she could just find a lightning light, her fingers brushed against a flashlight. She fumbled to turn it on, the beam sputtering weakly before casting a dim glow. The light swept the room. Nothing. No one. The whisper came again from behind her. "I've always been here." She spun around, the flashlight shaking, but the room was empty. Her breathing came in shallow gasps, the walls closing in around her. The flashlight flickered, then went out. And in the pitch-black silence, Claire realized she wasn't alone. The 19th of August, the discovery. When Claire's friend Jenna stopped by that morning, she knew something was wrong before she even opened the door. Claire always answered her texts, always picked up her call specially after everything that had happened, but not this time. Jenna knocked once, then twice, calling out her name. No answer. With a growing sense of dread, she tried the doorknob. It turned easily. The door swung open, and she stepped inside. The apartment was eerily quiet. No music playing. No sound of Claire's voice on a video call. Just silence. Her first thought was that Claire had finally left, packed up and gone somewhere safe. But the moment she stepped into the living room, she froze. There on the coffee table, perfectly centered, was Claire's phone. The screen was on, showing an open draft email. The text was familiar too familiar. Claire Turner, born the 14th of March, 1994. Died the 18th of August, 2021, age 27. Cause of death, homicide. Survived by no immediate family. Jenna's stomach turned. She'd seen that email before. Claire had shown it to her 2 weeks ago. But this wasn't the same email. This was a new draft, a fresh one, as if Claire had written it herself. Her voice wavered as she called out again, "Claire?" Nothing. She checked every room, the bedroom untouched, the bathroom empty, the kitchen just as Claire had left it the night before. No sign of a struggle, no sign of forced entry, no sign of Claire. Jenna dialed the police. When they arrived, they confirmed what she already knew. Claire Turner was gone. The detectives examined the phone, searched the apartment thoroughly. They even pulled the building's security footage again. No one had entered. No one had left. Not a single shadow on the cameras. It was as if Claire had vanished into thin air. Over the next few days, her disappearance dominated the local news. Neighbors whispered about the strange texts, the funeral invitation, the obituary. They talked about the police reports, the lack of evidence, the eerie silence from the authorities. But no one could explain what had happened. And then there was the most chilling part. The email wasn't just a copy of the obituary she'd received. It included a new line at the bottom, one that hadn't been there before. "You can stop looking." To this day, no one knows where Claire Turner went. No one knows who sent the emails, the texts, or the funeral invitation. No one knows what happened that night when the power went out, and the case remains open.